The desert air carries a different quality at night, when the heat of the day has finally surrendered to the vast darkness above. Welcome to the Dreamwave Motel, a weathered collection of adobe buildings that sits like a small island of light in this ocean of desert silence, where stories from all over settle, carried here by travelers and wanderers drawn to the quiet spaces between destinations. Tonight, you find yourself here under a canvas of stars, so bright they seem close enough to touch, the temperature having dropped to that perfect desert evening coolness of 65 degrees, with a gentle breeze carrying the faint scent of sage across the emptiness. As you settle into this quiet space, letting your breathing slow to match the rhythm of the desert night, consider that you are participating in an ancient human tradition, the act of looking up and wondering. The story you're about to hear unfolds in this very landscape, in the valleys and mountains of Arizona, where the clear desert skies have always invited contemplation of what lies beyond our everyday experience. It was on the evening of March 13th, 1997, that thousands of people across Arizona would find themselves looking up at those same stars, only to witness something that would challenge their understanding of the familiar desert sky they thought they knew so well. The sun had set over Phoenix that Thursday evening, much as it does on any March day in the Sonoran Desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink before surrendering to the deep blue of twilight. Dr. Lynn Kitei had been living in Phoenix for several years by then, having moved to Arizona from the East Coast to establish her dermatology practice. She was someone who appreciated the consistent beauty of Arizona sunsets, often taking time in the evenings to step outside her home in the Paradise Valley area and watch the daily transformation of the sky. On this particular evening, as she stood on her balcony overlooking the desert landscape, the air temperature was beginning its familiar descent from the day's warmth of perhaps 78 degrees to what would become a pleasantly cool evening in the mid-60s. The first reports that would later become part of the Phoenix Lights phenomenon allegedly began around 8 o'clock that evening, though the exact timeline has been reconstructed from hundreds of witness accounts, each carrying its own perspective on the events that unfolded. According to these various testimonies, what began as a typical desert evening would evolve into something far more extraordinary. Tim Lay, a management consultant who lived in the northwestern part of Phoenix, had been spending the evening at home with his family when his son reportedly called his attention to something unusual in the sky. As Tim would later describe it, he stepped outside into the cooling desert air to see what appeared to be a formation of lights moving silently across the northwestern horizon. The lights, he claimed, were arranged in what seemed to be a triangular or V-shaped pattern, moving from the northwest toward the southeast with a kind of purposeful deliberation that struck him as unlike any aircraft he had previously observed. The desert has a way of playing tricks with perspective, especially at twilight, when familiar landmarks begin to merge with shadows, and the sky takes on that deep blue quality that can make objects appear both closer and more distant than they actually are. The air at this hour often carries a crystalline clarity that can make lights visible from great distances, whether they belong to aircraft, celestial bodies, or something else entirely. Frances Emma Barwood, who was serving as a Phoenix City Councilwoman at the time, would later recount that she began receiving phone calls about unusual lights in the sky that very evening. The callers, she claimed, described seeing large formations of lights moving silently across the desert sky, often in patterns that seemed inconsistent with conventional aircraft. As someone who had lived in Arizona for many years, Barwood was familiar with the various military aircraft that regularly flew over the region, including flights from Luke Air Force Base and other installations. But the descriptions she was hearing that night allegedly struck her as different from the usual military aviation activity. The landscape across which these reported lights moved is one of stark beauty and vastness. The Sonoran Desert stretches for thousands of square miles, encompassing not only the Phoenix metropolitan area, but extending well into Mexico and California. It is a landscape of dramatic elevation changes, from the flat desert floor to mountain ranges that rise abruptly from the valley floors, creating a topography that can affect how sound travels and how objects in the sky appear to observers on the ground. As the evening progressed, more witnesses would come forward with their own accounts of what they claimed to have observed. Many described the lights as moving in formation, maintaining consistent spacing and altitude as they allegedly traversed the desert sky from northwest to southeast. The silence that many witnesses reported was particularly striking to them, given that the desert air typically carries sound quite well, especially in the cooler evening hours when temperature inversions can create acoustic conditions that make distant sounds seem remarkably clear. Mike Fortson, a cement truck driver who was reportedly driving on Interstate 17 north of Phoenix that evening, would later claim that he pulled his truck over to observe what he described as a massive triangular object moving silently overhead. According to his account, the object appeared to be large enough to block out portions of the star field above, moving with a steady, deliberate pace that seemed inconsistent with any aircraft in his experience. The freeway at that location runs through relatively undeveloped desert, where light pollution is minimal and the night sky retains much of its natural clarity. The temperature that evening was conducive to spending time outdoors, and many Phoenix residents were reportedly outside, enjoying the pleasant weather when they claimed to observe the unusual lights. Arizona in March offers some of the most comfortable weather of the year, with daytime temperatures typically reaching the upper 70s and evening temperatures settling into the comfortable 60s. These conditions meant that many people were in their yards, on patios, or driving with windows down, creating numerous opportunities for sky watching. Dr. Kitte, continuing her observation from her Paradise Valley home, would later claim that she was able to photograph some of the lights she observed that evening. Photography in low-light conditions presents particular challenges, especially with the film cameras that were standard in 1997. The desert atmosphere, while generally clear, can create its own optical effects, particularly when lights are viewed across long distances through air of varying temperature and humidity. The reported sightings were not limited to the Phoenix metropolitan area. Witnesses allegedly came forward from communities across Arizona, including Prescott to the north, Tucson to the south, and various points in between. This geographic distribution suggested to many observers that whatever was being witnessed was either quite large, quite high, or possibly multiple separate phenomena occurring simultaneously across a broad area. Prescott, located in the mountains north of Phoenix, sits at an elevation of approximately 5,400 feet, offering a different perspective on sky phenomena than the 1,000-foot elevation of the Phoenix Valley floor. The higher elevation and typically clearer air of the mountain communities can provide exceptional viewing conditions for aerial phenomena, whether conventional or otherwise. Several Prescott residents would later claim to have observed the lights from their mountain vantage point, describing them as appearing to move across the sky in a southeasterly direction toward the Phoenix area. As reports of the sightings began to accumulate, the descriptions showed both consistency and variation that characterizes many mass sighting events. Most witnesses described lights arranged in some form of pattern, often triangular or V-shaped, moving silently across the sky. However, the details varied, with some observers reporting amber-colored lights, others describing white lights, and still others claiming to see lights that appeared to change color or intensity as they moved. The human eye and brain work together to interpret visual information, but this process can be influenced by numerous factors, including expectation, lighting conditions, distance, and atmospheric effects. In the desert environment, particularly at twilight, these factors can combine to create viewing conditions that are both exceptionally clear and potentially challenging to interpret accurately. The vastness of the desert sky provides little in the way of reference points for judging the size, distance, or speed of objects, especially when those objects are sources of light against a darkening sky. Air Force pilot had disappeared earlier that week while flying an A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft on a training mission from Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson. The aircraft had deviated from its planned course and crashed in the mountains of Colorado, but not before flying over portions of Arizona, including areas near Phoenix. This incident had heightened public awareness of military aviation activity in the region and may have contributed to increased skywatching during that period. The military presence in Arizona is substantial, with multiple Air Force installations, Marine Corps air stations, and Army facilities conducting regular training operations across the state. Luke Air Force Base, located in the western Phoenix metropolitan area, is home to advanced pilot training programs and regularly hosts aircraft from various military branches. The Barry M. Goldwater Range, a massive military training area that stretches across southwestern Arizona, is used for a wide variety of aviation training exercises, including formation flying and tactical maneuvers. Understanding this military context is important for considering the various explanations that would later be proposed for the Phoenix Light sightings. The Arizona skies regularly host military aircraft engaged in training exercises, some of which involve formation flying, night operations, and the use of flares or other illumination devices. However, many witnesses would claim that what they observed that evening differed significantly from the military aviation activity with which they were familiar. As the reported sightings continued through the evening, the number of witnesses grew into the hundreds and eventually the thousands, according to various estimates compiled in the following days and weeks. The witnesses represented a cross-section of the Arizona population, including long-time residents familiar with local aviation activity, newcomers to the state, professionals from various fields, retirees, students, and families with children. This diversity of witnesses would later be cited by some researchers as lending credibility to the reports, while skeptics would point to the same diversity as evidence of the subjective nature of eyewitness testimony. Dr. Kittay would later describe her experience of that evening as transformative, claiming that it prompted her to begin a years-long investigation into the Phoenix Lights phenomenon and similar events. As a physician, she brought a scientific perspective to her inquiry, seeking to document and analyze the available evidence while remaining open to various possible explanations. Her medical training had taught her the importance of careful observation and documentation, skills that she would apply to her study of the unusual lights she claimed to have witnessed. The evening of March 13th gradually gave way to night as the reported sightings continued. The desert temperature continued its familiar descent, reaching the comfortable range that makes Arizona evenings so appealing to residents and visitors alike. Those who were outside during these hours were experiencing one of the desert's most pleasant times, when the heat of the day has dissipated, but the air remains warm enough for comfortable outdoor activities. Among the witnesses who would later come forward was a family camping in the South Mountain area, south of Phoenix. They claimed to have been enjoying an evening around their campfire when they observed what appeared to be a formation of lights moving silently overhead. The South Mountain area offers excellent views of the Phoenix sky, being elevated above the valley floor, while still being close enough to the city to serve as a reference point for judging the size and distance of aerial phenomena. Camping in the Arizona desert in March provides an opportunity to experience the natural rhythms of the desert environment. As evening settles, the sounds of the day give way to the sounds of night, the calls of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures moving through the brush, and the subtle sounds of the desert cooling. It is in this natural soundscape that the reported silence of the lights would have been particularly noticeable to outdoor observers. The geographical features of the Phoenix area create unique conditions for observing sky phenomena. The valley is surrounded by mountain ranges, including the McDowell Mountains to the northeast, South Mountain to the south, and the White Tank Mountains to the west. These mountains can create reference points for observers trying to judge the altitude and movement of objects in the sky, but they can also create optical illusions, making objects appear to move differently than they actually are as they pass behind or in front of mountain silhouettes. As the evening progressed toward 10 o'clock, additional reports began to emerge of different lights being observed in the sky over Phoenix. These later sightings were described by many witnesses as involving lights that appeared to hover over the South Mountain area before allegedly disappearing one by one. The description of these later lights differed somewhat from the earlier reports of moving formations, suggesting to some investigators that multiple separate events may have occurred that evening. The South Mountain sightings were reportedly observed by hundreds of witnesses from various locations across the Phoenix Valley. Unlike the earlier sightings of moving lights, these later observations were described as involving stationary or slowly moving lights that appeared to remain in the same general area for an extended period. Many witnesses claimed to have called friends and family members to come outside and observe the lights, creating a shared experience that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. Photography and videography of the later South Mountain lights would prove to be more successful than attempts to capture the earlier moving formation. Several witnesses claimed to have obtained photographs or video footage of lights appearing to hover in the area of South Mountain. However, as with all photographic evidence of unusual aerial phenomena, questions would later arise about the nature of what was actually captured on film and whether the images accurately represented what the witnesses believed they were seeing with their naked eyes. The challenge of photographing lights in the desert sky at night involves numerous technical considerations. The vast distances involved mean that even relatively bright lights can appear quite small in photographs. The desert air, while generally clear, can contain dust, pollen, or other particles that can affect the appearance of lights, especially when photographed with the longer exposure times necessary for low light conditions. Additionally, the movement of lights, whether real or apparent, due to atmospheric effects, can create blurring or streaking in photographs that may not correspond to what observers see directly. Terry Proctor, a businessman who was reportedly driving home from work that evening, would later claim that he stopped his car on the side of the road to observe lights that appeared to be hovering over the South Mountain area. According to his account, the lights were clearly visible against the dark mountain silhouette, appearing amber or orange in color and remaining stationary for several minutes before allegedly disappearing one by one from left to right. The South Mountain Preserve, which encompasses the area where many witnesses reported seeing the later lights, is a large desert mountain park that rises from the Phoenix Valley floor to an elevation of over 2,500 feet. The preserve offers hiking trails and scenic overlooks, but at night it becomes a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. The contrast between the dark mountain and the lighter sky can create conditions where lights appear particularly prominent, whether they are located on the mountain itself, behind it, or in the sky above it. Local television stations began receiving calls about the unusual lights during the evening, and some news crews were reportedly dispatched to investigate. The immediacy of these reports meant that some media personnel were able to observe and attempt to document the phenomena as they were occurring, rather than simply reporting on them after the fact. However, television news equipment of that era faced the same technical challenges as personal cameras when it came to capturing clear images of lights in night sky conditions. Rick Keefe, a television news reporter, would later claim that he and his camera crew were able to observe and film some of the lights from their vantage point in Phoenix. The footage they obtained would become part of the documentary record of the Phoenix Lights incident, though interpretation of what the footage actually shows would remain a subject of debate. Television news standards require verification and corroboration of unusual claims, but the rapidly developing nature of the sightings that evening made such verification challenging in real time. The Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, located in the central part of the Phoenix metropolitan area, serves as a major aviation hub for the southwestern United States. Air traffic controllers at Sky Harbor would presumably have been aware of any unusual aerial activity in their airspace, and their radar systems would typically detect aircraft operating in the vicinity. However, the official response from aviation authorities regarding the March 13th sightings would not come immediately, leaving witnesses and media to speculate about what official agencies might know about the reported phenomena. Aviation regulations require aircraft operating in controlled airspace to maintain radio contact with air traffic control and to operate transponders that identify them to radar systems. Military aircraft engaged in training exercises are typically coordinated with civilian air traffic control to ensure separation from commercial aviation. The reported characteristics of the Phoenix Lights, particularly the claimed silence and formation flying, raised questions about whether what was observed was consistent with known aviation procedures and capabilities. As the evening drew toward its close, the desert began to settle into its nighttime quiet. The temperature had dropped into the comfortable 60s, and the slight breeze that had been present earlier in the evening had largely stilled. These are the conditions that make Arizona nights so memorable, when the air is clear and still, and sounds carry with unusual clarity across the desert landscape. The witnesses to the Phoenix Lights events of March 13th would soon discover that their experiences were part of something much larger than individual sightings. As reports were compiled and compared in the following days, the scope of the phenomenon became apparent. Thousands of people across Arizona had allegedly observed unusual lights in the sky that evening, creating one of the largest mass sighting events in modern UFO history. But the immediate aftermath of that evening was quieter. Witnesses returned to their homes, many of them calling friends and family members to share what they had observed. Some attempted to find news coverage of the events, while others began to question whether they had actually seen what they thought they had seen. The human mind has a remarkable ability to second-guess unusual experiences, particularly when those experiences challenge our understanding of the familiar world around us. Dr. Kite would later describe spending much of that night reviewing the photographs she had taken, trying to determine whether they had captured anything that corresponded to what she remembered seeing. The process of examining photographic evidence of unusual phenomena can be both exciting and frustrating, as cameras may capture details that the eye missed while failing to record aspects of the experience that seemed most significant to the witness. The following morning brought the clear, bright sunlight that characterizes Arizona days, and with it, a return to the familiar routines of daily life. Many witnesses found themselves wondering whether the events of the previous evening had been as extraordinary as they had seemed at the time. The desert landscape that had seemed so charged with mystery, the night before appeared reassuringly normal under the morning sun. However, the phone calls began early that morning. Local news stations, law enforcement agencies, and government offices reportedly began receiving inquiries about the previous evening's sightings. The volume of calls suggested that the number of witnesses was substantial, and that many of them were seeking official explanations for what they had observed. Frances Barwood, the Phoenix City Councilwoman, would later describe being contacted by numerous constituents who wanted to know what the city government knew about the lights they had witnessed. As an elected official, she felt a responsibility to investigate the concerns of her constituents, even when those concerns involved phenomena that fell outside the normal purview of city government. The initial response from official sources was limited. Military installations typically do not provide detailed information about training exercises or operational activities, citing security considerations. Civilian aviation authorities focus primarily on air traffic safety and regulation rather than public inquiries about unusual sightings. This lack of immediate official explanation left witnesses and the media to develop their own theories about what had been observed. Dr. Lynn Kite found herself in an unusual position as both a witness to the events and a medical professional with scientific training. Her background had taught her to approach unusual claims with appropriate skepticism, while remaining open to evidence-based explanations. She began to research the phenomenon of UFO sightings and the scientific methods that had been applied to studying such reports. The scientific study of UFO reports, or what researchers prefer to call UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, involves applying rigorous analytical methods to eyewitness testimony, photographic evidence, and any available physical data. This field of study has attracted scientists from various disciplines, including atmospheric physics, astronomy, psychology, and aeronautics. The challenge lies in developing reliable methods for distinguishing between conventional explanations and genuinely anomalous phenomena. The Phoenix Lights incident would eventually attract the attention of researchers from various backgrounds. The large number of witnesses, the geographical scope of the sightings, and the availability of some photographic evidence made it an important case for those studying unusual aerial phenomena. However, the complexity of the reported events and the passage of time between the sightings and detailed investigations would create challenges for researchers attempting to determine exactly what had occurred. One of the factors that made the Phoenix Lights particularly intriguing to researchers was the reported duration of the sightings. Unlike many UFO reports that involve brief observations of unusual objects, the Phoenix events allegedly extended over several hours and involved multiple phases of activity. This extended timeline provided more opportunities for documentation and witness testimony, but it also increased the complexity of analyzing what had been observed. The question of multiple witnesses is significant in UAP research. When large numbers of independent observers report similar phenomena occurring at the same time and location, it suggests that something observable did occur, even if the nature of that something remains uncertain. However, mass sightings also present challenges, as social and psychological factors can influence how witnesses interpret and remember their experiences. The role of expectation in witness testimony is well established in psychological research. When people are aware that others have reported unusual phenomena, their own perceptions may be influenced by those reports. This does not mean that witnesses are being dishonest or deliberately misleading, but rather that human perception and memory are complex processes that can be affected by numerous factors. In the case of the Phoenix Lights, many witnesses were unaware of other sightings when they made their initial observations. The events were unfolding in real time across a large geographical area, and communication between witness groups was limited. This independence of initial observations is considered significant by researchers, as it reduces the likelihood that reports were influenced by prior knowledge of what others were seeing. The geographical distribution of the reported sightings also provided data for analysis. If the observations represented a single object or phenomenon, the reports from different locations should show consistency with an object moving along a predictable path. If multiple separate phenomena were involved, the reports might show different patterns of movement or behavior from different vantage points. The reported timeline of events suggested two distinct phases of activity. The earlier sightings, roughly between 8 and 8:30 p.m., involved descriptions of lights in formation moving across the sky from northwest to southeast. The later sightings, occurring after 10 p.m., involved reports of lights that appeared to hover over the South Mountain area before disappearing. This temporal separation led some investigators to conclude that two separate events may have been observed and subsequently conflated in media reports and public memory. The silence reported by many witnesses became a particularly significant aspect of the Phoenix Lights case. Conventional aircraft, even at high altitude, typically produce some sound that can be detected by ground observers, especially in the quiet desert environment. Military aircraft engaged in formation flying would generally be expected to produce clearly audible sound. particularly if they were operating at the relatively low altitudes, suggested by witness descriptions of the object's apparent size. However, sound propagation in the desert environment can be affected by numerous factors, including temperature gradients, humidity, wind patterns, and the presence of obstacles such as mountains or buildings. It is possible for aircraft to operate in conditions where their sound signature is reduced or distorted by atmospheric effects. Additionally, the relationship between the perceived size of aerial objects and their actual altitude is notoriously difficult for ground observers to judge accurately. Tim Lay, one of the witnesses who observed the earlier formation of lights, would later participate in various interviews and investigations of the Phoenix Lights phenomenon. His background in business consulting had given him experience in analyzing complex situations and evaluating different explanations for observed phenomena. He approached his role as a witness with an awareness of both the significance of his testimony and the need for careful, accurate reporting of what he had observed. The process of witness interviews in UAP investigations involves several challenges. Memory of unusual events can change over time, particularly as witnesses are exposed to media reports, other witness accounts, and various theories about what they may have seen. Professional investigators attempt to obtain witness statements as soon as possible after the events, and to document not only what witnesses report seeing, but also the conditions under which they made their observations. The conditions on the evening of March 13th were generally favourable for sky observation. Weather records indicate that the sky was clear, with good visibility and minimal wind. The moon was in a waning crescent phase, providing some illumination without being bright enough to wash out fainter stars or aerial lights. These conditions meant that observers would have had excellent opportunities to see aerial phenomena, whether conventional or otherwise. The clear atmospheric conditions also meant that any unusual lights would have been visible across considerable distances. In the desert environment, lights can often be seen from 50 miles or more away, depending on their brightness and elevation. This extended visibility range meant that a single phenomenon could potentially have been observed by witnesses separated by large geographical distances. As news of the Phoenix Lights sightings spread in the days following March 13th, additional witnesses began to come forward with their own accounts. Some of these were people who had observed the events but had not initially realized that others had shared their experience. Others were witnesses who had been hesitant to report unusual sightings, but were encouraged to do so by the media coverage and the number of other witnesses who had come forward. The media response to the Phoenix Lights began with local television and radio coverage, but eventually expanded to national and international attention. The story had elements that made it attractive to news organizations, the large number of witnesses, the geographical scope of the sightings, the availability of some photographic evidence, and the lack of immediate official explanations. USA Today, one of the national newspapers that covered the story, reported on the Phoenix Lights in the days following the March 13th events. The newspaper's coverage helped bring the story to national attention and contributed to its becoming one of the most well-known UFO cases in modern history. However, newspaper coverage also contributed to the simplification and sometimes distortion of the witness accounts, as complex multi-part events were condensed into brief news articles. Television coverage of the Phoenix Lights included both news reports and later documentary treatments. The visual nature of television made it particularly well suited to covering a story involving unusual lights in the sky, and several television productions would eventually feature extensive coverage of the Phoenix Lights case. However, television coverage also faced the challenge of limited time and the need to present complex events in an accessible format for general audiences. Dr. Kittay's investigation of the Phoenix Lights phenomenon would eventually lead her to produce her own documentary film about the events. Her medical background and status as a witness gave her a unique perspective on the case, and her documentation efforts would contribute significantly to the historical record of the Phoenix Lights. However, her dual role as both witness and investigator also raised questions about objectivity that are common in UAP research. The question of objectivity is central to scientific investigation of unusual phenomena. Witnesses to unusual events often become emotionally invested in particular explanations for what they observed, which can affect their ability to evaluate evidence impartially. Professional investigators attempt to maintain objectivity by considering multiple possible explanations and evaluating evidence according to established scientific standards. In the case of the Phoenix Lights, several different explanations would eventually be proposed by various investigators and organizations. These explanations ranged from conventional aircraft and military exercises to atmospheric phenomena and genuinely anomalous objects. The evaluation of these competing explanations became an important part of the ongoing investigation of the case. Air Force would eventually provide a statement regarding the Phoenix Lights, claiming that the lights observed over South Mountain were flares dropped during a training exercise at the Barry M. Goldwater Range. According to this explanation, A-10 aircraft from the Maryland Air National Guard were conducting a training mission that involved the deployment of illumination flares over the military range southwest of Phoenix. Military flares are designed to provide illumination for ground operations and typically burn for several minutes while suspended from parachutes. When deployed at high altitude, these flares can be visible from considerable distances and may appear to hover in the sky as they descend slowly under their parachutes. The flares used in military exercises are typically quite bright and can appear orange or amber in color. However, the Air Force explanation addressed only the later South Mountain sightings and did not provide an account of the earlier reports of formation lights moving across the sky. This partial explanation satisfied some observers, but left others with questions about the complete events of March 13th. The timing of the Air Force statement, which came several months after the initial sightings, also contributed to skepticism among some witnesses and investigators. The geographic relationship between the Barry M. Goldwater Range and the South Mountain area is consistent with the flare explanation for the later sightings. The military range lies southwest of Phoenix, and flares dropped over the range could potentially be visible from Phoenix locations, appearing to hover over the South Mountain area due to the perspective of distant observers. However, the exact details of the military exercise, including the number, timing, and location of flare deployments, were not provided in detail by military sources. The question of whether military flares could account for all of the reported Phoenix Lights observations became a subject of ongoing debate. Supporters of the flare explanation pointed to the consistency between flare characteristics and witness descriptions of the later South Mountain Lights. Critics argued that the earlier formation sightings were not consistent with flare deployment and that some characteristics of even the later sightings were not fully explained by the flare hypothesis. The debate over explanations for the Phoenix Lights highlighted the challenges inherent in investigating unusual aerial phenomena. Different witnesses may observe different aspects of complex events, leading to varying descriptions that may appear inconsistent even when they are all accurate. The passage of time between observation and detailed investigation can affect the reliability of witness testimony and the availability of supporting evidence. Additionally, the public nature of high-profile UFO cases can create pressures that affect the investigation process. Witnesses may feel pressure to conform their accounts to prevailing theories, while investigators may feel pressure to reach definitive conclusions even when the available evidence is ambiguous. These social and psychological factors can complicate the scientific study of unusual phenomena. Despite these challenges, the Phoenix Lights case has continued to attract scientific attention and investigation. Researchers have applied various analytical methods to the available evidence, including photographic analysis, atmospheric modeling, and statistical evaluation of witness testimony. While these investigations have not produced unanimous agreement about what occurred on March 13th, they have contributed to the development of more rigorous methods for investigating unusual aerial phenomena. The Phoenix Lights incident also had cultural and social impacts that extended beyond the immediate scientific questions about what was observed. The case became a touchstone for discussions about government transparency, the reliability of official explanations, and the nature of unusual phenomena in general. It also contributed to increased public interest in UFO phenomena and scientific investigation of such reports. For the city of Phoenix itself, the Phoenix Lights became an unexpected part of local identity. The incident generated ongoing tourism interest and became the subject of local festivals, books, and other cultural productions. This ongoing cultural presence has helped maintain public interest in the case while also contributing to the evolution of how the events are remembered and discussed. The role of elected officials in responding to constituent concerns about unusual phenomena was highlighted by the actions of Frances Barwood, the Phoenix City Councilwoman, who called for investigation of the reported sightings. Her advocacy for transparency and investigation, despite the potential political risks of being associated with UFO phenomena, demonstrated the intersection between civic responsibility and scientific inquiry. Barwood's efforts to obtain information about the Phoenix Lights through official channels illustrated both the possibilities and limitations of citizen involvement in investigating unusual phenomena. While she was able to bring additional public attention to the case and advocate for transparency from government agencies, she also encountered the constraints that affect civilian access to military and aviation information. The long-term investigation of the Phoenix Lights has involved both professional researchers and citizen investigators. The case has been examined by organizations such as the Mutual UFO Network, the Center for UFO Studies, and various academic researchers. This sustained attention has produced a substantial body of analysis and documentation, though consensus about the nature of the observed phenomena remains elusive. The technological context of the Phoenix Lights is also worth considering. The events occurred in 1997, before the widespread adoption of digital cameras, cell phone cameras, and social media that characterize more recent unusual phenomena cases. The documentation of the Phoenix Lights relied primarily on film cameras and camcorders, which had different capabilities and limitations than modern digital technology. The limited photographic evidence from the Phoenix Lights reflects both the technical challenges of the era and the unexpected nature of the events. Most witnesses were not prepared to photograph unusual aerial phenomena and had to rely on whatever cameras were available to them at the time. The results were often of limited quality, particularly given the challenging conditions of photographing lights in the night sky. However, some photographic evidence was obtained, and this has been the subject of extensive analysis. Photographic analysis techniques can provide information about the characteristics of light sources, their apparent movement, and their relationship to the surrounding environment. While photographic evidence cannot always provide definitive answers about the nature of unusual phenomena, it can contribute valuable data to the investigation process. The evolution of the Phoenix Lights story over time illustrates how unusual phenomena cases develop and change as they become part of popular culture. Initial witness reports were relatively straightforward accounts of observed lights, but as the story gained media attention and became the subject of various investigations and documentaries, additional layers of interpretation and speculation were added. This evolution is common in high-profile UFO cases and presents challenges for researchers attempting to distinguish between original witness testimony and later elaborations or modifications. The most reliable data typically comes from sources that are as close as possible to the original observations before the influence of media coverage, other witness accounts, and theoretical discussions. The scientific approach to studying the Phoenix Lights and similar phenomena emphasizes the importance of maintaining multiple working hypotheses rather than committing prematurely to a single explanation. This approach acknowledges that unusual phenomena may have multiple contributing factors, and that the available evidence may be consistent with several different explanations. The application of Occam's razor, the principle that simpler explanations are generally preferable to more complex ones, is often cited in discussions of UFO phenomena. However, the application of this principle requires careful consideration of what constitutes a simpler explanation, and whether apparently simple explanations actually account for all of the available evidence. In the case of the Phoenix Lights, the flare explanation might be considered simpler than more exotic alternatives, but only if it adequately explains all of the reported observations. If significant aspects of the witness testimony are not consistent with the flare hypothesis, then additional factors must be considered, potentially making the overall explanation more complex. The psychological and social dimensions of the Phoenix Lights case are as important as the physical evidence in understanding what occurred. The experience of witnessing unusual phenomena can be profoundly affecting for individuals, often leading to lasting changes in their worldview and interests. Many Phoenix Lights witnesses reported that their experience motivated them to learn more about aerospace technology, atmospheric phenomena, or scientific methodology. The social dimension involves the ways in which communities respond to and interpret unusual experiences. The Phoenix Lights occurred in a large metropolitan area with diverse populations, and the responses to the events reflected this diversity. Some community members were eager to accept exotic explanations, while others preferred conventional alternatives. Still others remained uncertain about what had been observed. The role of the media in shaping public understanding of the Phoenix Lights cannot be overstated. Media coverage influenced not only how the general public learned about the events, but also how witnesses understood their own experiences. The framing of the story in news reports, documentaries, and other media productions contributed to the development of the Phoenix Lights narrative. The economic impact of the Phoenix Lights has been modest but measurable. The case has generated tourism revenue for the Phoenix area and has been the subject of various commercial productions, including books, documentaries, and merchandise. While these economic effects are minor compared to major tourist attractions, they demonstrate the lasting cultural significance of the events. The educational value of the Phoenix Lights case extends beyond the specific question of what was observed on March 13th. The case provides opportunities to examine scientific methodology, the evaluation of evidence, the reliability of eyewitness testimony, and the social dynamics of unusual phenomena. These educational applications have made the Phoenix Lights a subject of interest in academic settings as well as popular culture. The international attention that the Phoenix Lights received also contributed to its significance. The case was covered by media outlets around the world and became known to UFO researchers and enthusiasts internationally. This global awareness helped establish the Phoenix Lights as one of the landmark cases in modern UFO history, comparable to other well-known incidents such as the Roswell case and the Belgian UFO wave. As you settle deeper into the quiet of this desert evening, with the temperature now having reached that perfect coolness that makes Arizona nights so memorable, consider how the Phoenix Lights case illustrates the complex relationship between human observation and natural phenomena. The desert sky above you is the same sky that thousands of witnesses gazed upon that March evening, wondering about what they were seeing and seeking explanations for the extraordinary. The legacy of the Phoenix Lights continues to evolve as new generations discover the case and as investigative techniques advance. Modern technology offers capabilities for documenting and analyzing unusual phenomena that were not available in 1997. Digital cameras, video recording devices, and sophisticated analysis software provide tools that could potentially offer new insights into historical cases like the Phoenix Lights. However, technology also presents new challenges for investigating unusual phenomena. The ease of digital manipulation means that photographic and video evidence must be subjected to more rigorous authentication procedures. The proliferation of conventional aircraft, including drones and other unmanned vehicles, has created new categories of aerial objects that might be misidentified as unusual phenomena. The human element remains central to understanding cases like the Phoenix Lights. While technology can assist in documentation and analysis, the experiences of witnesses provide the foundation for investigating unusual phenomena. The credibility, consistency, and detail of witness testimony continue to be crucial factors in evaluating what may have occurred during reported sightings. Dr. Kite's continued investigation of the Phoenix Lights and related phenomena has contributed to a growing body of documentation about unusual aerial observations. Her approach, combining personal experience as a witness with systematic investigation and documentation, represents one model for how individuals can contribute to the scientific study of unusual phenomena while maintaining appropriate skepticism and methodological rigor. The question of disclosure, the potential release of additional government information about UFO or UAP phenomena, has gained renewed attention in recent years. Various government agencies have acknowledged the existence of programs for investigating unusual aerial phenomena, and some previously classified documents and reports have been made public. These developments have renewed interest in historical cases like the Phoenix Lights and raised questions about what additional information might be available. However, the relationship between official acknowledgement of UAP investigation programs and specific cases like the Phoenix Lights remains unclear. Government disclosure efforts have focused primarily on more recent cases involving military personnel and have not necessarily provided new information about civilian sightings from earlier periods. The Phoenix Lights case therefore continues to rely primarily on witness testimony and civilian investigation rather than official documentation. The meteorological conditions on March 13, 1997 have been examined as part of efforts to understand the Phoenix Lights. Weather data from that evening indicates clear skies, good visibility, and minimal wind, conditions that would have been favorable for observing aerial phenomena. However, these same conditions would also have been suitable for military training exercises, civilian aviation, or other conventional activities that might explain some of the reported observations. Atmospheric phenomena can sometimes create visual effects that are mistaken for artificial objects or lights. Temperature inversions, electromagnetic effects, and other natural processes can cause conventional light sources to appear unusual or to behave in unexpected ways. Investigators of the Phoenix Lights have considered various atmospheric explanations, though none have been definitively established as accounting for all of the reported observations. The geographical setting of the Phoenix Lights in the Sonoran Desert of Arizona provides a unique context for understanding the case. The desert environment offers excellent visibility conditions, minimal light pollution in many areas, and a clear horizon that facilitates observation of the sky. However, the desert also presents challenges for judging distances and sizes of aerial objects, as the clear air and lack of reference points can create optical illusions. The mountain ranges surrounding the Phoenix Valley create distinctive silhouettes against the night sky that can affect how aerial phenomena appear to observers. Objects passing behind mountains may appear to disappear and reappear, while objects at different altitudes may seem to move at different speeds relative to the mountain backdrop. These geographical factors must be considered when evaluating witness descriptions of movement patterns and object behavior. The Native American communities of Arizona have their own traditions and perspectives regarding unusual phenomena in the desert sky. While these traditional viewpoints were not prominent in the initial media coverage of the Phoenix Lights, they represent important cultural contexts for understanding how different communities interpret unusual experiences. The integration of diverse cultural perspectives can contribute to a more complete understanding of how unusual phenomena are perceived and remembered. The astronomical context of March 13th, 1997, has also been examined by investigators. The positions of planets, stars, and other celestial objects on that evening have been calculated to determine whether any astronomical phenomena might have contributed to the reported sightings. While astronomical objects are generally well understood and predictable, unusual atmospheric conditions can sometimes cause familiar celestial objects to appear different than expected. The aviation context of the Phoenix area includes not only military installations, but also civilian airports, private aviation facilities, and various forms of experimental aircraft development. Arizona's clear weather and expansive airspace make it attractive for aviation activities of all types, and the state hosts numerous aerospace companies and testing facilities. This rich aviation environment means that unusual aircraft or flight patterns might be observed more frequently in Arizona than in other locations. The relationship between the Phoenix Lights and other reported UFO cases has been the subject of comparative analysis by researchers. Some investigators have identified similarities between the Phoenix events and other mass sighting cases, while others have emphasized the unique characteristics of the Phoenix case. Comparative analysis can help identify patterns in UFO reports that might provide insights into common causes or explanations. The temporal aspects of the Phoenix Lights, involving events that allegedly occurred over several hours and in multiple phases, distinguish it from many other UFO reports that involve brief sightings of single objects. This extended timeline has provided more opportunities for documentation and witness testimony, but it has also made the case more complex to analyze and understand. As the night deepens around you in this quiet desert space, with the stars now fully visible in their magnificent desert clarity, you might reflect on how the Phoenix Lights case represents both the possibilities and limitations of human knowledge. The thousands of witnesses who reported unusual phenomena that March evening were participating in the ancient human tradition of observing and trying to understand the world around them. The scientific investigation of unusual phenomena like the Phoenix Lights represents an attempt to apply systematic methods to experiences that challenge conventional understanding. This process requires balancing openness to new possibilities with appropriate skepticism about extraordinary claims. The goal is not to prove or disprove particular explanations, but rather to understand as completely as possible what actually occurred. The social and cultural impact of the Phoenix Lights extends beyond the immediate question of what was observed that evening. The case has become part of the cultural landscape of Arizona and has contributed to ongoing discussions about the nature of unusual phenomena, the reliability of official explanations, and the importance of scientific investigation of extraordinary claims. The personal transformations reported by many Phoenix Lights witnesses illustrate the profound impact that unusual experiences can have on individuals. Many witnesses reported that their experience motivated them to learn more about science, astronomy, or related fields. Others became involved in UFO research or investigation. Still, others simply maintained a more open attitude toward the possibility of unusual phenomena. The challenge of maintaining scientific rigor while investigating phenomena that may fall outside conventional scientific paradigms is illustrated by the Phoenix Lights case. Researchers must navigate between the extremes of excessive skepticism that dismisses all unusual reports and excessive credulity that accepts extraordinary claims without sufficient evidence. This balance is difficult to achieve and maintain, particularly in cases that attract significant public attention. The role of uncertainty in scientific investigation is highlighted by cases like the Phoenix Lights. Science progresses not only by answering questions definitively, but also by identifying what remains unknown and developing better methods for investigating difficult questions. The Phoenix Lights case has contributed to the development of improved methods for investigating unusual aerial phenomena, even if it has not provided definitive answers about what was observed. The continuing interest in the Phoenix Lights, more than 25 years after the events, illustrates the lasting impact of well-documented unusual phenomena cases. The case continues to be discussed, analyzed, and investigated by researchers, and it continues to attract the attention of new generations of people interested in understanding unusual phenomena. The technological developments since 1997 have created new possibilities for investigating and documenting unusual aerial phenomena. Modern cameras, radar systems, and analysis techniques offer capabilities that might provide new insights into historical cases or better documentation of future sightings. However, these same technological advances also create new categories of conventional explanations that must be considered when evaluating unusual reports. The Phoenix Lights case demonstrates the importance of preserving witness testimony and other evidence from unusual phenomena events. The detailed documentation efforts undertaken by Dr. Kite and other investigators have created a historical record that continues to be valuable for research purposes decades after the original events. This documentation includes not only witness accounts, but also photographs, official statements, and various forms of analysis. The relationship between individual witness experiences and collective understanding of unusual phenomena is illustrated by the Phoenix Lights case. While each witness observed the events from their own unique perspective and location, the compilation of multiple witness accounts has created a more complete picture of what allegedly occurred that evening. This collective approach to understanding unusual phenomena is an important aspect of scientific investigation. The interdisciplinary nature of investigating unusual phenomena, like the Phoenix Lights, is evident in the variety of expertise that has been applied to the case. Researchers from fields including astronomy, atmospheric physics, psychology, sociology, and aeronautics have all contributed insights to understanding the events. This interdisciplinary approach is necessary because unusual phenomena cases often involve multiple complex factors that require diverse forms of expertise. The question of reproducibility, a fundamental aspect of scientific investigation, presents particular challenges for studying unusual phenomena like the Phoenix Lights. Unlike laboratory experiments that can be repeated under controlled conditions, unusual aerial phenomena typically occur spontaneously and cannot be reproduced on demand. This limitation requires investigators to rely primarily on observational data and natural experiments rather than controlled studies. The ethical considerations involved in investigating unusual phenomena include respecting the privacy and dignity of witnesses while also pursuing scientific understanding. Witnesses to unusual events may face skepticism, ridicule, or unwanted attention as a result of sharing their experiences. Investigators must balance the goal of gathering complete information with the need to protect witnesses from potential negative consequences of their participation. The Phoenix Lights case has contributed to discussions about the proper role of government agencies in investigating unusual phenomena. While some witnesses and investigators have called for more extensive official investigation and disclosure, others have argued that civilian research organizations may be better positioned to study unusual phenomena without the constraints and limitations that affect government agencies. The educational applications of the Phoenix Lights case extend to multiple academic disciplines. The case can be used to teach scientific methodology, critical thinking, psychology of perception and memory, sociology of belief systems, and various aspects of atmospheric and aerospace science. This educational value helps ensure that the case continues to contribute to learning and understanding, even as the original events recede into history. The international perspective on the Phoenix Lights has contributed to comparative studies of unusual phenomena reports from different countries and cultures. Researchers have examined similarities and differences between the Phoenix case and unusual phenomena reports from other parts of the world, seeking to identify common patterns that might provide insights into the nature of such phenomena. As the desert night reaches its deepest quiet around you, with the temperature having settled into that perfect coolness that makes sleeping under Arizona stars such a peaceful experience, you might consider how the Phoenix Light story represents both human curiosity about the unknown and the ongoing effort to understand our place in the larger universe. The night sky above the Sonoran Desert remains as vast and mysterious as it was on that March evening in 1997, when thousands of people looked up and saw something that challenged their understanding of the familiar. Whether what they witnessed was the result of military exercises, atmospheric phenomena, or something more extraordinary may never be definitively determined. But their willingness to share their experiences and to seek explanations for what they observed represents the best of human scientific curiosity. The desert air carries a different quality of silence now, in the deepest part of the night, when even the sounds of distant highways have faded to barely audible whispers. This is the time when the boundary between waking and sleeping becomes as thin as the desert air itself, when consciousness begins to drift like dust on the evening breeze, carrying with it the stories and mysteries that make the desert such a place of wonder. The stars above shine with the same clarity that illuminated the sky on that March evening, each point of light representing distances and scales that challenge human comprehension. In contemplating these vast reaches of space and time, the questions raised by the Phoenix Lights become part of larger questions about what we know, what we don't know, and what we may yet discover about the universe around us. The gentle sounds of the desert night, the distant call of a coyote, the rustle of a small creature moving through the brush, the subtle whisper of air moving across the sand, create a natural symphony that has remained unchanged for thousands of years. It is in this timeless soundscape that the events of March 13th, 1997 take their place as another chapter in the ongoing story of human encounters with the unknown. As your breathing slows to match the rhythm of the desert night, and your consciousness begins to drift toward the peaceful realm of sleep, you carry with you the story of those thousands of witnesses who looked up at this same desert sky and saw something that would remain with them for the rest of their lives. Whether that something was conventional or extraordinary, their experience reminds us that the world still holds mysteries worth contemplating and questions worth asking. The desert night embraces you now with its perfect temperature and infinite quiet, carrying you gently towards sleep under a canopy of stars that have witnessed all of human history and will continue to shine long after all current mysteries have been solved and new ones have taken their place. In this vast and ancient perspective, the Phoenix Lights become part of the eternal human story of looking up, wondering, and seeking to understand our place in the cosmos. Rest now in the peaceful silence of the desert night, where all questions fade into the gentle rhythm of breathing and the soft whisper of wind across sand, carrying dreams of lights in the dark sky and the enduring human quest to understand the mysteries that surround us in this vast and beautiful universe.